Hey guys, welcome to the Daily Word Bible Study, a plain and simple book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse study through the entire Bible. We are in Matthew chapter 5, and um we're at the point in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus is going to contrast. It's going to be very sobering because Jesus is going to contrast religion versus true religion. We could say he's going to contrast sin, what true sin is, according to God. Okay, in other words, we have our estimate of sin. And Jesus is going to now, remember he starts off by saying, well, let's pull up the scripture. So Matthew chapter 5, and let's see here. Oh, so we left off. I'm going to read verse 20, and I want to read verse 20. He says, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of God." Now, I'll take away from from this what the Pharisees are, since there are no Pharisees around today. But their ways are their religious ways. So when he says, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, our takeaways, we can say what religion is today. And religion today is man's traditions, man's views, commentary on what God is. You can also say is man's effort of what his effort to get to God, his righteousness. Now, in doing that, we oftentimes will underestimate, or we don't look at things the way God tells us, or how he estimates. And he's getting ready to break this down here. And again, some of this is going to be sobering. In other words, especially, see, religion will say, and you get very haughty, you get very prideful in your religion. And again, everyone has it, even Christianity. Okay? There was a pastor that I knew once that said this in a sermon. He said, sin is what you do, but I don't. That's the hypocrisy. But watch how Jesus now contrasts this. And again, brace yourself because this is going to be very sobering. Verse 21 says, you have heard. Now remember he said, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Now watch this. He says, you have heard that it was said to our ancestors, do not murder. So what do we mean by murder? Committing an act to kill someone maliciously. That's murder. Okay? Not manslaughter, but murder, right? To kill someone with hatred. All right. So then he says, you have heard that it was said of our ancestors, do not murder. And whoever murders will be subject to the judgment. So what is he doing? Summarizing the Old Testament law, right? This is what he says, you have heard this said. And no doubt the Pharisees taught this. But notice it, verse 22. But I tell you, everyone who is angry with his brother will be subject to the judgment, and whoever says to his brother, fool, will be subject to the Sanhedrin, but whoever says, you moron, will be subject to hell and fire. Now, the way the King James sort of, it kind of switches it. So remember the King James said, but whoever says fool will be subject to hellfire. And then I think he says, and whoever says to his brother, Raka. Now, what does Jesus pierce the heart? In other words, sin is more than just an act, but it pierces the heart. And what God looks at, excuse me, it's the heart. Now, remember I said there are a lot of people that say, well, you know, God just judges my heart. God knows my heart. And that may be a stronger indictment. See, because you may judge yourself by saying, but I've never committed murder. I've never committed murder. But notice what Jesus says. If you're angry with your brother, you're subject to judgment. If you say to your brother, you're a fool, you'll be subject to the Sanhedrin. But if you say moron, and this idea here, you moron, will be subject to hellfire, it's scorning your brother, damaging your brother's spirit. Okay? In other words, that has more of an impact. That has more of an impact than the actual physical death of killing in God's eyes. Okay? In God's eyes. Verse 23, he says, so if you are offering your gift on the altar, and there you remember that your brother has something against you, leave your gift there in front of the altar. First go and be reconciled with your brother, and then come and offer your gift. Now, this is very interesting here, because in our mind, we say, um, we say, when we talk about worship, now think about this. We talk about worship. Now let's just get this example. Now watch this. Think about you in a worship service. You're really in the zone, right? You you got your worship songs going, and you got your emotions pouring out in your worship songs, and then here comes somebody that with their kids, you know, bouncing all over the seat, right? Kind of disrupting your flow. Now, notice what he says right here. He says, it would be better for you to say, let me help this person, rather than to say, or let's put it this way, what, as far as worship is concerned, how do you think God would respond better? What do you think God would want more? Your uninterrupted worship songs? Or maybe to help? Okay? Now, more so to the point, if you have a rift in your brother, in other words, y'all get into it, and it causes strife, it causes you not to speak, which do you think God would much rather have as an act of worship? Your uninterrupted song singing, or to try to make peace with your brother? Notice he says here, before you offer your gift, go make peace with your brother. That's the worship that God would want, that God would honor, as opposed to just your time of worship, your uninterrupted worship. See again, see how God gets into our hearts? Verse 25 says, reach a settlement quickly with your adversary while you're in the way with him, or your adversary will hand you over to the judge, and the judge and hand you over to the judge to the officer, and you will be thrown into prison. I assure you, you will never get out of there until you have paid the last penny. Now, this is also what we call debtor's kind of a debtor's slavery. But wisdom here would say, wisdom here would say that if you get into some kind of legal dispute, it is best to try to settle it before you go to court. Now, a lot of people get angry. They will stand their ground out of their pride, and then you end up going to court. You get sued, and then you have to pay. The courts order you to pay. So Jesus gives us a little wisdom here by saying that try to work it out. Remove your pride and try to work it out. Verse 27, notice he says here, you have heard. Now, men, hang on to this one. You have heard that it was said, do not commit adultery. But I tell you, everyone who looks at a woman to lust after her has already committed adultery with her in his hands. Now think about this. Whoever commits, he says, now again, some people can brag, I have never committed adultery. Let's throw in also fornication. But notice Jesus goes deeper, doesn't he? He gets into our heart. And boy, he gets into the heart. He says, if you look on a woman to lust after her, you've already committed adultery with her in your heart. You know, it's kind of interesting. So a lot of people, one of the reasons why people don't, a lot of people haven't committed adultery, it might be because of opportunity. Think about that. It might be because of opportunity. You have not been faced with it. Now, I said, too, I'm going to throw women into this as well because they lust just as much as men. Women in pornography has risen over the years. So they lust, too. They may not lust in the same kind of way as a man, but they still lust. So this applies to both men and women. That if you lust, now, of course, he's talking to men. If you lust after a woman in your heart, you've committed adultery. Now, let me also throw this in too in our day, because you have the rise of pornography, and some people try to justify watching pornography. But here would be a question: how can you watch pornography and not, right, lust in your heart? Thus, you're actually, as far as God is concerned, committing the act of adultery and fornication. You're lusting in your heart. Now, this is not a condemnation because, yes, you could certainly walk away from this being condemned. But just keep in mind what Jesus is simply, the standard that he is setting is one that you will not trust in your own righteousness. So keep that in mind. So this is not condemnation coming from Jesus, but it is certainly dealing a death blow to righteousness, your religion. Okay? When he says, accept your righteousness. So keep this in mind, the comfort that we have is, who is our peace? Well, Jesus is our peace. Well, let me oh, go to Colossians. Oh, I should have. Okay, Colossians chapter 1. Here we go. Let me read this because this is going to be what's going to be a comfort to us. All right. Colossians chapter 1, it says, once you were alienated and hostile in your minds because of your evil actions, but now he has reconciled you by his physical body through his death to present you holy, faultless, and blameless before him if you indeed remain grounded and steadfast in the faith. Now, notice, and not shift away from the hope of the gospel that you've heard. Now again, notice that he reconciled us by his physical body through his death. He presented us holy, faultless, and blameless. Right? So I just want to keep that in mind. That is the salvation there. Okay? And remember that what the point that he is saying here is that if you think that your righteousness is just obeying ordinances and commands, and then you boast in that. So, for example, okay, I don't commit adultery, but yet do you lust in your heart? Okay, every man lusts in his heart. Let's think about that. Every man lusts in his heart. Okay, but Jesus reconciled us. Now, verse 29 says, if your right eye causes you to sin, gouge it out and throw it away. For it is better that you lose one of the parts of your body than for your whole body to be thrown into hell. And if your right hand causes you to sin, cut it off and throw it away. For it is better for you that you lose one part of your body than for your whole body to go into hell. Now, it is interesting. There's a couple of points I want to make from this. One, notice that Jesus does affirm that people go to hell. Notice what he says right here. If your right eye causes you to sin. Now, here's another funny point. I've never seen anyone squabble over the interpretation of this. I've never seen anyone say, let me take this literally. Now, there are some crazies out there. There are some just stupid Christians. These churches that you go to where they handle snakes and drink poison. They're just plain stupid. That's just the height of stupidity. Okay? So yeah, you can have people that will read this and say, let me gorge my eye out, or let me sever my hand. I have personally never seen it or heard of it, but we have heard of those crazies that, again, handle snakes and drink poison. But I think we get the point of what Jesus is saying right here, that if something is causing you to sin, cut that out. Now let's get back. So for example, men, if pornography is your temptation, don't watch it. If alcohol is your sin that causes you to be drunk, stay away from the bars. See, I think we kind of understand that. Don't. So that's why he said, if your right eye causes you to sin, gorge it out. Right? I've never seen anybody come to church with a patch over their eye, or patch over their eye and a kind of missing limbs. So I think we get the point right here. Okay. So that and again, to me that's sobering, because what that tells me is that I'm never good enough. Now, if you think back when we went through some of the Old Testament scriptures and stuff, and we see how we are never good enough. We are never good enough. And that's really the message here. How does our righteousness exceed the righteousness of the Pharisees and the scribes and the Pharisees? Because the Pharisees relied upon their works. Now, their works were hidden, right? Their works, was, as Jesus is going to later say, whitewashed. But inside, he said there were dry, wicked bones. Okay, dry, wicked bones. So, um, 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 how does my righteousness surpass the righteousness of the Pharisees? Because first and foremost, right there, you can see that none of us could ever be good enough. But Jesus reconciled us by his body and through his death, and he presented us holy, blameless, and faultless before God. All right, guys, don't forget to like and share this video and subscribe to the Bible Plain and Simple. And if you have any thoughts or comments, add it to the comments section below. All comments are welcome. And I will see you in the next study. Probably the next couple of days, these may be recorded uh, um, um, studies because of the holidays. And happy holidays. Happy Thanksgiving to everyone. I'll see you in the next study.